By neurohacking, we mean anything that can optimize the mind-brain interface and the
Mm-hmm.
function thereof. So this is cognitive and psycho-emotional and health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could roughly define it as well-being optimization, but even larger than that, we think of it as sovereignty optimization. People's capacity to make good choices, right? To
Mm-hmm.
be adaptive, which is a function of intelligence, of agency, of sentience all together. And there's obviously kind of human software, right? Psychology
Sure.
involved,
Yeah.
and there's human hardware, physiology involved, and we know that the software-hardware divide in humans is a plastic one, right? It's continuously interaffecting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, your work with neurofeedback is neurohacking. The other people you've had on the show discussing meditation, et cetera, is all in that space. So we're interested in all categories of technologies that can meaningfully increase the homeostatic capacity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
homeodynamics, as you like to call them,
Yeah.
of the human neuroregulatory system, and thereby increase people's capacity for complex thinking,
Mm-hmm.
emotional resilience, etc. And the reason why collective is anyone that is doing meaningful work here, we want to figure out how we can participate at a research level and at a information product level, etc. So like us talking here together is awesome. Co-sharing information in the space.
That's great. So you say sovereignty. It's an interesting way to frame that.
Yeah.
Agency. What do you mean by? I mean, what kinds of things are bottlenecks to human agency that appear to be affected by things we can do to the brain? Like how can we affect agency in tractable ways? What are you seeing? What are you exploring?
Yeah, so by agency here we mean the actuator capacity of a complex system, the ability to act on and in the world.
Okay.
Right? Sentience is kind of roughly related to our sensory input capacity,
Mm-hmm.
intelligence to our information processing of that sensory input, so that those exist in a closed loop. Take in information about the world, which
Mm-hmm.
is internal and external sensing, process it to inform choice, make choice, get data about that choice, recursively upregulate.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the agency side, on the capacity to act, obviously that requires the capacity to have good information and information processing, so there's good choice informing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It also
Mm-hmm.
requires impulse control, so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
one can actually have executive function and all that they know come to bear. It also requires on the kind of choice-making side of it, requires the capacity to think through things using
Mm-hmm.
different frameworks, right? Critical thinking frameworks, systemic thinking frameworks, lateral thinking, etc. But also on the agency side, emotional resilience is a key factor, so that as one is working with things and difficulties come, they can process that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
physiologically and psychologically in ways that empower them to continue to learn rather than get shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at the physiology of that, we know a lot about how dopamine, about how adrenal hormones, about how many different aspects of neurochemistry and physiology are involved in one sense of drive, one sense of reward dynamics that can predispose dysfunctional or more functional patterns of human behavior, increased sense of capacity psychologically, physiologically, etc.
So again, we're back to this somewhat soft division between the software and the hardware. So on the hardware side, things, as you said, like impulsivity or executive function, I think you obliquely referred to working memory, essentially, which is, from my perspective, the biggest bottleneck in human performance, and one that appears to be the least responsive to change. But also ways of thinking about emotional regulation and decision-making criteria. I'm much more familiar with the physiology side. The biohacking I do is on the brain, not the mind, largely. What are you seeing as some interesting ways that we can get into cognitive change?
Mm-hmm. So the
Or psychological.
brain-mind question,
Yeah.
right, is at the core of the philosophy of neuroscience, the philosophy of mind, the philosophy of science itself, right? Because the brain-mind gets into the brain physics and the question of what is consciousness, what is physics, how do they interact, is there bidirectional causation? Beyond the scope of what we're probably going to dive into here, but it's definitely at the core of what's informing the work we do, because how in any model of philosophy of mind, however we address this, it's clear that what's happening physiologically is affecting one's subjective experience, and what's happening in one's subjective experience is being mirrored on, or affecting the physiology side.
Yeah.
And so we can obviously modify brain chemistry. The whole field of psychiatry is focused on this, right? Psychoneuropharmacology, and not just pharmacology, but neurotech in general.
Sure, sure.
To affect cognitive and psychological predispositions and capacities. We can also do practices that are involving one's direction of their own attention and subjective experience, whether we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, right, CBT, DBT, other psychotherapeutic processes, or even what we call more kind of mindfulness processes of proprioception, paying attention to various sensations in the body, parts of the body, and watch the changes, as I'm sure you've done a lot of, on physiology, EEG processes, and then watch the capacity for neuroplastic changes in the connectome with enough time and input in there. So it's not only that the division between hardware and software is soft, it's they are both co-evolving all the time.
And interdependent and changing each other, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm a reductionist in this space a little bit. So for me, the mind is simply the part of the brain that we are aware of and experiencing. And I kind of don't go below that. I have somewhat of a Buddhist perspective where I don't really believe in consciousness. I believe in moments of consciousness, but not the overarching I. Like if the brain falls over, from my perspective, that's it. There is no mind outside of the corporeal boundary of the skull, so to speak, even though I know that there are non-local phenomena that we're observing now in the brain, and I'm sure you are deeper into this idea of, again, the physics affecting consciousness. I've just saw a paper last week that showed that water has some strange kind of non-local, I hate to use this word, but quantum tunneling in microtubules, apparently.
Yeah.
Under some conditions, it appears like water molecules have a superposition and can be in more than one place at once inside of cells.
Correct.
This is getting very quickly out of the realm of anything we fully understand. But do you think that we are getting to a place where we're starting to run up against the edge of well understood science, and we're off in the quantum weeds, or is there something here that we're making actual progress in actionable understanding of the brain?